From the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
Hello and happy holidays, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the television program where we talk about stuff going on here in the state of Indiana. We got a special program today. It is our last program of 2024. So as we say goodbye to 2024 and hello to 2025, let's take a look at our panel here of award-winning or semi-award-winning panelists or something like that. I don't know who gave you guys the award, but you're all winners in my book. Our Libertarian friend, Mark Rutherford. Mark, good to see you.
Good to be here.
Our Democratic friend, also good to have her in studio for the first time. Usually she joins us by Zoom. So Terri Austin, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Abdul.
And this guy, he's always around here. Our good friend, Jim Merrit. Jim, good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
So let's start with the big news of this week before we look at the year in review. State Senator Greg Taylor lost his minority leader spot to Shelley Yoder. Greg was accused of inappropriate contact by 6 women altogether. Terri, we'll start with you, even though you're not in the legislature anymore, but you were there during the time of that culture. What's going on here?
Well, I think it's a new era where women feel more comfortable or beginning to feel more comfortable speaking out. Before, and I don't know the extent that this type of behavior is widespread. You know, the vast majority of my colleagues, and I'm sure Jim might say the same, were actually wonderful people, very respectful, always appropriate, but it only takes a handful and sometimes just one, and it taints the whole process. But in this case, I think the attention was too great, the pressure was too great, and it became a huge distraction from the agenda of the Senate Democratic Caucus, and they had to make a change. And I say hats off to Shelley Yoder and the other legislators who had the courage to stand with her and replace Leader Taylor.
Jim, you were in the Senate for a number of years. You saw the culture change, how it was when you first got there back in 1990 to today. Your thoughts?
Well, it did change. Terri may or may not remember this, but lobbyists would actually have booths in hotel rooms where they would entertain legislators, and that was before I even got there. That stopped more like 1988. 1990.
Now, when you say entertain, what does entertain mean?
Well, they'd hit this big block of cheese and some crackers. No, they had cocktails, and it was and it evolved into those dinners and parties and entertainment opportunities in the later years. But this has been happening through the years, and it's very concerning. And Senator Taylor and others before him, I feel sorry for the families. I feel sorry for Senator Taylor and his family. It's confusing. It's complex. As I've said to you before, Abdul, members, all 150 members, are not employees. They are employees of the state, but it's a different breed of cat in regards to sending a member of the Senate or the House of Representatives to HR. It doesn't happen. And I believe that the leadership of the Indiana General Assembly has to get their arms around it, maybe after this busy, cantankerous session with the Legislative Council, where they have a special commission that looks at this. And I've mentioned this several times, that maybe in the rules that if something happens to a certain degree, that a letter is written to the Marion County prosecutor. There has to be a point where members of the Indiana General Assembly get it. Back in the early 90s, I believe we should have, I told President Pro Tempore Garton, Senator Garton, that we needed to end the internship program when we had a member of our caucus, the Republican caucus, who went way too far with an intern. And I was recruiting, and for many times I was recruiting on college campuses like Anderson College back then, that we wanted these kids to come to school. You're almost like their parent. You're almost like their supervisor, and they trust us. And it's so important that relationship with an intern or a staff member, there's a big, tall wall between them. And I see these separate events that we see in the Senate right now that we demand action. There needs to be some strict rules going on.
Mark,
Created.
Mark, I'd love to get your thoughts from sort of a legal perspective, because obviously, you have interns, you have employees, you have HR manuals. Does the HR manual need to be rewritten, or just people need to read it?
Well, people need to read it. Sometimes I think they don't read it. But I think that it doesn't hurt to keep looking at them and adding to them and adding things. I think, Jim, your point about the leadership taking this on maybe after the session and having more definitive rules out there, even though the rules are out there, the more that you can condense them in another place that may be even simpler or easier to understand than the rules from a Congress, for example. They can be a little convoluted because of all the issues that are on there, maybe unclear if you're not used to the law and what these terms mean. But make it so that it is. Because right now, I've seen this since I started practicing back in the 1980s. The standards and the changes about what's appropriate and what's not has gone for the better. And it's amazing how much freer that women are in being able to make the complaints about these bad actions that happen. Not saying that did happen. I want to make sure Senator Taylor has a due process in this matter about what is alleged. But this has changed, but I do know a lot of women still feel very uncomfortable in raising these matters. We're a long way in getting to where we need to be, in my opinion, but there can be more help by having things such as a pamphlet or rules, or say, don't do this, or remember, we're full of power and prestige as members here. So, interns, no, I don't care what it is, because they are probably very young, and they're learning, and they may be scared of you. And you can't treat them as the same because you're 20 years older than them, 30 years older than they are. So those things need to be done. But the problem with allegations always is you've got to see how it is. Is it provable? Why is it that all of a sudden all these allegations are being made? And that has to be looked into. But I do think that the senators and the people in the House of Representatives, the members of it, the more you can get for them to help understand that, the better it is. And they're behind, they're older, so they haven't talked about this and aren't seeing what has changed for the better, in my opinion.
Terry, we'd love to get your thoughts on this. As a former female lawmaker, did you ever have a conversation with young women? Any young women ever approach you like, hey, this senator or this representative did X, Y, Z. How do I report this? How do I feel comfortable?
Well, I don't know if you will recall, but I was on the ethics committee, and we tackled the issue of sexual harassment and some allegations. The challenge is this. One of the requirements for being a legislator now, in addition to just going through ethics training, which usually occurs on the first or second day of session, is you also have some mandatory sexual harassment training. But the truth is, it needs to go on more than an hour or an hour and a half. And there also needs to be a very clear pathway for staff to know how to report, how to protect themselves. And I know they've specified it because we actually helped write it for the legislator's handbook, or whether it was rule. I think it's actually maybe in the rules now. But part of the problem is the ethics committee's work is confidential. They have to have agreement to release any findings or even no findings. And there's a power structure between a legislator and even staff and interns. And there needs to be, it was not uncommon for interns to go out and show up at after hours, restaurants, bars with legislators. I always said that just needs to be off limits. And, it's one thing to take your assistant with you if you have a committee dinner that's the entire committee from both the House and the Senate. It's another thing where some of these things go on like it's Animal House.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. You're looking at our panel today. It's our end-of-year discussion. Our good friends, Republican Jim Merrit, Libertarian Mark Rutherford, and Democrat Terri Austin. Want to change gears a little bit and just look at sort of the broader issue of this type of behavior in the legislature, because it's not just Republicans and it's not just Democrats. It crosses the board. Curtis Hill had his issues a few years ago. And so, Jim, let me ask you, what's it going to take for folks to get it through their head? You just don't do this type of stuff.
Well, it goes back to, having almost like a serious situation where you do let the Marion County prosecutor go. Or no. Terry's exactly right in so many different ways with what she talks about it. The whole idea is getting the message to the legislator, and for some reason we just haven't been able to convince them to do that. And she's right. It's like spring break for some of these individuals who serve in the legislature for 4 months. They're away from home.
And you bring up an excellent point, and Mark wanted to get your thoughts on this, and Terry, yours as well. Is the fact that these guys spend 4 months down here, away from a home that they think they can sort of, hey, I can do whatever I want, then I'll put my big boy pants on or big girl pants on when I go back home to my district.
Well, the fact that happens gives opportunity for some people, but when they run for the office, when they get elected, and this is what I do with everything that I do, is I look at it and say, what are my obligations? How should I treat people? What should I do? What can I do that's fun but isn't offensive because it isn't or isn't? So you don't do that. You don't harass people. You don't make fun of people. You treat them respectfully. If you don't like them, you don't have to be with them, so don't be with them. I mean, those are the things that you have to do, and you have to get that mindset. Being in the Indiana House, being in the Indiana Senate is very, very, very important, and the people who run for that should realize that. Otherwise, they're going to keep getting in trouble. And no matter how much I say this, it's going to happen again. But you're trying to get people to understand it so that maybe when they have a temptation or they want to say something, they go, oh, cannot do that, because my job is representing my district in the Indiana House or in the Indiana Senate, and this doesn't help me do this.
Terry, does everybody just see that poster in their office, everything ever needs to know I learned in kindergarten?
Yes.
We might need to rewrite it a little bit. Let me just say this. It wouldn't matter if they were away from home for a day or 4 months. The truth is that type of behavior, while it may have been accepted at one point, is not appropriate. It's never been appropriate. And a legislator, an elected official, a staff member, and I would say this about Governor Holcomb. He's never been accused of inappropriate behavior. I want to say that. You hold yourself to a higher standard. You are a model for young people. You are a model for your district. It's not just what you bring on yourself, but it's what you bring on your family back home, your children, your community. And you need to think about the reputation you're earning, and there needs to be consequences. And I don't say just the Marion County leadership, the Speaker of the House, the minority leaders in both caucuses, and President Pro Tem need to all be on the same page that if there's a whiff of this, you call that legislator in, you sit them down, and you say, this is what I'm hearing. You may deny it, but we're watching. And
I think you're exactly right. And one of the things that we saw with Curtis Hill, and as well as I think Senator Taylor, because I don't know the ins and outs of it anymore, but Raymond Donovan was a nominee for labor for Reagan. He was going to be the labor secretary. There was all sorts of accusations on him. He finally gets confirmed, and then he asked President Reagan, "What door do I go knock on to get my reputation back?" It has to be a balance of it. And with Senator Taylor, there's no apparatus for him to go to dispute or defend himself. And the same thing happened with Curtis Hill. And I think it needs to be even in that regard as well.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. We're looking back at 2024 with our panel with the Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Terri Austin, and Republican Jim Merrit. Let's look at some of the big stories out of 2024. Obviously, we had the election, which kind of caught people by surprise, kind of didn't catch people by surprise. You had issues here in Indiana with Diego Morales and all his issues that are out there. Terry, what struck you the most about 2024?
I would say, I think the big story was the the 7-way gubernatorial primary, what was $40 million? I'm trying to remember what the total package was. And
Of raised?
yes, and raised, and then more
Spent.
money spent even. But the fact that in the end, Mike Braun walked away with it. But then you turn around, you get to the convention, he can't get his pick over the finish line for lieutenant governor. That says a lot about some of the internal machinations going on within the Republican Party and how different groups are fighting for control.
Jim?
Well, she put her thumb on one part of that is Governor-elect Braun now sought out and got Trump's President-elect Trump's endorsement. I would imagine that if Trump had endorsed someone else, it'd been a highly competitive race. And this election was all about Trump and his coattails this time compared to other elections in 16 and 20. And it remains to be seen on what is going to happen in 25. But I believe that 24 is kind of foundational to 25. And we had a lot of the big events that go on with the governor, with the presidential, with the primary. And but I think it just leads into 25 and big decisions that have to be made. I always say that the governor's first session really lays out what that individual's term is going to be like, because in 26, half the Senate and the whole House of Representatives will be up for re-election, and
So basically, he's got till September.
he has until probably May 1st, and they have to hit it running, and that's what you see in the last month or so.
Mark?
Well, I thought that that in Indiana, Trump was going to get the presidential vote. That seemed obvious to me. But I saw that all this stuff going on with Braun, how much support he had, Beckwith getting lieutenant governor a nomination, even though he wasn't Braun's favorite, and that was an interesting matter that's creating a lot of controversy. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the governor, lieutenant governor not being a team, because you really do have to work together with the way those are defined. And now you've got some competition and going on with the between the two of them. So that was the biggest deal to me in 25, or in the election last year, 24, this year, is that we have two basically different types of Republicans being governor and lieutenant governor. That's my opinion on that, and I'm not so sure that's a healthy thing. You also have the Morales issue, which is still there and not going away. I don't think it will go away, and more stuff just kind of gets out there in the grapevine about it. That's not good either. And I don't mind a party winning a lot, and let's say they get the House and the Senate a lot, but supermajorities are really, in my opinion, dangerous for any party. You need to have something for your opposition to be able to kind of, this is too much, time out, and that it's something that they can't do very often because it has a bad political effect for them. But without that, you begin to lose that you've got other people out there who may not be happy with what you're doing, and you might be able to change things that will help your party and will keep your opposition okay.
Sarah, let me ask you, when you look at sort of the political landscape here in Indiana, what do Democrats need to do to get back to being competitive?
Well, I really believe that we need to focus on a solid economic message. That needs to be core, and it used to be what the Democratic Party was about. This is an important year, 2025, because you're going to see both parties go through a top-to-bottom rank-and-file reorganization. Everything from, precinct committee people were just elected for the Republican Party in the fall. Democrats still have another year. However, you're going to elect county chairman, you're going to elect your congressional district chairman, you're going to elect your state party chairman. Now, on the Republican side, Governor Braun will probably appoint, or it will be whoever he prefers. But the Democrats have got to have, one, we've got to get over this hump about what has happened in the media with Senator Taylor and a response. I was really pleased to see the state party come out and the state party central committee take some action. But again, we've got to make sure that we focus on the issues that are important to Hoosiers. And even Governor Daniels has said, even in the New York Times, that supermajorities are not a good thing. We've got to find a way, I think, whether it's redistricting commission or some better balance of redistricting, we've got to find a way to have more give and take in our policymaking.
Jim, let me ask you, is it possible to get that done?
Well, first of all, we need strong parties. We need a strong Libertarian Party. And I've always been for, a three-party a process. And it was always, in the Indiana Senate, we always looked towards Senator Lannon and the strength of the Democrat caucus to help us craft laws. And Terri knows this, that there's a large percentage of the bills that pass through the Indiana Senate that are 90 to 100% supported by the whole chamber.
The vast majority.
Yeah, vast majority. And this year, coming 2025, this year is about, for Republican Party, is about governing. And it's also about building the party and making sure that state chairman has the 2026 state convention right in their focal point. The reelection, should he decide to do it, of Governor Braun will last. That'll take time, but the whole point in this next chairman is to work towards that convention. And this is not election year, so it goes back to governing, having a solid cabinet, having a solid public policy that has clarity, working with the legislature to create a budget for the next 2 years, and then work on the other issues aside.
And you make an interesting point, Jim, and I want to get the panel's thoughts on this, is if you look at the thing about governing, what's the most important thing lawmakers do? That's pass a budget. We saw this week the revenue forecast come out, and it ain't pretty at all. And most of it gets eaten up by Medicaid. And the one thing I noticed when I checked my Facebook feed, I checked my memories, about 10 years ago, it was like 1 out of every 9 Hoosiers was on Medicaid. Fast forward, 7 years ago, it was 1 out of 7. Then it was 1 out of 5. And the last time I checked, it was like now 1 out of 3. Terri, what's going on here?
Hoosiers are becoming poorer. And I will tell you, the General Assembly has made some policy decisions and passed some laws within the last 3 years that are going to continue to drive that Medicaid rate up because they made promises that people would be eligible for Medicaid. And I'm talking about unmarried mothers with young children and infants. And that is not going to go away. And the question is, are they going to cut people on the other end, the elderly, the infirmed? I mean, it's something that really needs to be looked at through a strong economic lens. But that's part of our problem.
Jim, I know you've been one of your big issues lately has been the issue of poverty. Is this something we can get under control?
I think it's very difficult. I think we talk about honor Scholar House in Anderson, where they help people go to college and teach them the ways of life, and the have-nots are starting to overwhelm the haves. And this state, albeit a wonderful place, strong economic development, strong employment, but I see it so much where people are lined up on Saturday mornings for food. And that is not the American way. That is not the Hoosier way. And the legislature is not going to solve it in one session. And as well as the Medicaid issue of adding more and more people on it, so be it, because people are in need. But there's got to be a way that the legislature can pay forward where you're helping people, but you're also balancing the budget. And you're putting more people on the job roles where more people are employed.
And Mark, I want to get your libertarian perspective on this, because obviously libertarians want to make sure that people have what they need, but also that individual achievement and less government as possible. Is it possible to put all that together and make it work?
It's definitely possible about that. But I would say that the legislature, the city governments, county governments, et cetera, they're not looking at it closely enough to see, is it affordable? Eventually, you run out of other people's money. You always have to remember about that. You have to make difficult decisions, but you have to look at what is it that we can do that's going to cause people to be able to do more for themselves, and that we don't have handicaps out there. I'm very familiar with Medicare because my parents had to go through that. It worked for them, but does it work for everybody? And even with Medicare, if you come into Medicare with more money, you do way better and you get better deals and you can get more things done than people who are poor. So is that a fair system? Those are things that have to be looked at, but you also have to look at things like, if you want to give out free food, why should you be stopped from government? Give out free food. Even if it's not the best out there, that's better than no food. I mean, those are the issues that we have to look at seriously.
There are 200 food pantries in Marion County alone, and there's got to be a better system to help people. And I mean, I could talk all day about this, that people are very much struggling. And that struggle, that insecurity, raises fear. Fear raises crime. I mean, it's all working together. And we want a safe society. We want an educated society, and we want a nourished society. We have the legislature, the governor have a real problem on their hands, and it's not just for the next 4 years.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. As we get coming to our final phase of this program for 2024, a couple of questions. First of all, what would you say was the biggest story of 2024? Mark, we'll start with you and just kind of go around the table.
Biggest story of 2024 for elections generally? Boy, that's a really good question. There's lots of things that were my favorites in it. But personally, I'd have to say that Braun being selected governor and Beckwith as lieutenant governor for the state of Indiana creates all types of issues and not necessarily positive ones. So that was a very, very interesting situation. And how did that happen? And Republican Party is going to have to look about what went on that. I've heard a lot of things. I know of a lot of things about what went in the backgrounds. And the state chairmen and the county chairmen are going to have to get realistic. We've got to have a team. We can't have people who are just too different parts of this, even if we don't like one or we think we could strengthen it with another person. Is that the best team? That's what should be looked at. But there are other choices I could have as well.
Terry, let me ask you, what would you say would be the biggest story in 2024?
Well, mine has nothing to do with politics, but it's
Thank you.
two women. I'm going to say Caitlin Clark and Taylor Swift. Two women who had a tremendous economic impact, not just on the central Indiana, Indianapolis area, but across the state in a very short period of time. And to me, I'm cautiously optimistic that women are going to be able to have a stronger pathway and a stronger impact in the next 3 years.
It's funny you mentioned Taylor Swift because I'm a member of the Columbia Club. We found out that November was one of our best months we ever had, and in part because of Taylor Swift. And all our hotel rooms
Yep.
we're full.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to mention Taylor Swift and Caitlin Clark, and it just all depends on what section of life you want to talk about. When you talk about politics, it's definitely Trump and Braun. But if you could talk about economic development in that section, the investment that the Holcomb administration is bringing into this state with data centers and with Meta and with Lilly and it just, I saw something just the other day that $5 billion worth of investment in Marion County alone. And so, it just all depends on the culture or the politics or the economic development. There are stories, the Pacers' success, that went so well. We have a lot to talk about on these shows.
Final question for you folks. 2025, right around the corner. Mark, what's the big story you're going to be looking at?
The big story that I'm going to be looking at, again, I go to politics a lot, and the General Assembly, what's going to come out of it? How are they going to reform some things? How are they going to do some things they're doing well, still doing well? What's going to come out of that? And how is that going to help people or hurt people and be able to do things like get out of poverty?
Terry?
I'm going to say it's going to be the intersection of state sovereignty against a new role and approach for the federal government. I'm wondering if we're going to start to see some ideas and authorities collide, quite honestly. I won't say that there will be buyer's remorse. I don't want to say that, but I think that, President-elect Trump has already said he's coming out strong on day one, and I think there may be a time where the states and the president butt heads, even Republican states.
As I jokingly say, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it.
One might say that property tax reform. Another might say the budget of the state of Indiana. When I heard Senator Braun speak at a picnic one day, and it was out in Lisa Nashala's picnic, and he started talking about combing through government, and since Governor Daniels left, state government has grown incredibly, and I think if Republican Party needs to be for small government in education and safety, but small government, I'm going to be really watchful to see how Governor Braun can eliminate what we don't need and change government in the state of Indiana the way it would be proper to represent the Hoosier state of Indiana.
All right. Well, this has been our program for today. Our guests on the program today have been Republican Jim Merrit, Libertarian Mark Rutherford, and Democrat Terri Austin. So thank you all very, very much for being with us. And by the way, thank all of you for being with us. And by the way, special thanks to the good folks here at Edge Media Studios. Aaron and Jacob, they do a great job dealing with me and all my issues as well. So, folks, thank you all very much. Have a good holiday season, and we'll talk to you next year. You've been watching Indiana Issues.